It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That is Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. Thank you so much for joining us ahead of Giants and Commanders this Sunday. Now, Logan, before we dive into the preview of this game, and what a banger it's going to be at FedEx Field, we want to talk a little bit about the offensive strategy for the Commanders and offensive strategy in general. This is coming off of a conversation I had. Well, one, it's a conversation that we've been having kind of generally here. But I took it to a different place, a different level, a nerdy level, with Seth Walder from ESPN. Seth is one of their analytics guys. He does a great job creating analytics-based content. He's kind of a must-follow, especially on Sundays on Twitter, if you're still on Twitter, because he has like all these fourth down numbers, and they should go for this or not go for that. And we also talked about team building and a lot of the other non-game specific analytics around football. But one of the things that we talked about, and we're going to have Seth on the podcast this offseason to like do an hour on this, is the intersection of scheme and the numbers. And I'm going to try to make this as efficient, ironically, as possible in kind of describing the conundrum we're trying to solve here. But basically, for years, people have said like, oh, once we had the data, it's very clear that passing is more efficient than running. So the solution for more offense and better production is just pass the ball more. Do the thing that's better without doing the thing that you don't do that is not as efficient. Well, what we all kind of agree on, though, is at some point that starts to lose steam. Because if you pass the ball 100% of the time, the defense would play you a certain way. If they absolutely knew that. We know that being one-dimensional is bad. It makes it very hard to move the ball. So at some point, there is a magical number, and it definitely changes for each team. Like your ability to maximize your offense with Patrick Mahomes passing it versus Tommy DeVito, all due respect, are going to be very different numbers. But there's somewhere on the scale from 100% run to 100% pass is a number that maximizes your chances of moving the ball and scoring on offense. And I think Seth did a great job of talking about how that's an area that he really wants to study more, is like the marriage of scheme and the analytics themselves. But before we dive into any numbers, Logan, like this is something you've thought about a lot as well, as someone who knows the schematics and the X's and O's of football as well as anyone, and also loves to dive into the data and kind of look and manipulate it to find out, what's going on under the hood of an offense. So that's the broad general setup. Your turn to talk.
Yeah, no, I think that's this is something that if you could quantify this mathematically, you'd make a lot of money, I think. And I think one of the things that we've run into, and I don't know how your conversation went with this gentleman, but like one of the things you run into is there's like it's multifactorial. There's many variables associated with it. Like, so I mean, just take the Commanders, and we were just messing around with some EPA stuff and graphs and doing some composition in our production meeting before this started. And the offense for the Commanders based on that metric is pretty good. Like it's 7th in the league over the last couple of games. And if you could take out the Buffalo game, I think it's probably even higher than that, because like there's the game against the Broncos where it was very, very efficient. The game against Arizona, which there's some turnovers in there, so it probably brings it back down. But seventh ranked EPA is probably pretty good. Obviously, the yardage numbers are good, all those different things. But there's something else there, right? That you're trying to get to in terms of maximizing what the offense can be. And what is a maximized offense? And this is something that I've kind of had conflicting thoughts about. Is a maximized offense necessarily the most analytically efficient offense? Because when you look at San Francisco, for example, I think that's a pretty good example. They kind of have this reputation of having this hyper efficient offense, but they also understand the role that their defense plays in winning games. And so because they run the ball a ton, they have a lot of play action pass, they insulate the quarterback quite a bit. Like Kyle has made those decisions to maximize that version of that team as opposed to that version of that offense. Because I'm sure there's stuff that he would do and could do to score more points and get more yards. But is that what's best for that team? Is that what's best for Brock Purdy? And so in the context of this team and Sam Howell, one of the things that I keep coming back to, like, even while we were talking about it, is, people want them to run the ball more. They want them to kind of, again, find this balance, find this tipping point offensively. And I think that there is probably some merit to that, increasing the running frequency. But one of the things that I run into when I look at the numbers with this team is they're not very efficient on first and second down running the football. I think they're 30th in the NFL over the last couple of weeks in EPA on rushes on first and second down. And that's not great, because if you look at the data, first down is the easiest down to throw the football because everything's on the table. You can run, you can pass, you can run a screen, reverse, whatever you want, right? It's the first down of the drive. When you get to 2nd and 10, it becomes significantly more challenging to throw the football, right? Because defenses now kind of say it's 2nd and 10. We got to protect the sticks. Let's get into softer, more compatible coverage structures with stopping the pass, right? So that's what happens. And then on 3rd down, it becomes the worst, right? So I look at this and I say to myself, like, if you're not efficient on first down running the football and you're encouraging these 2nd and 10 scenarios, you're not maximizing the offense. But like, you hear guys like who are very, kind of analytically driven, like the coach for the Chargers, for example, Staley. And he's like, there is an advantage that is not quantifiable to running the football, where you force guys to kind of, in the week of practice, I have to prep for this run and this run. I have to learn how to take on a block, and I have to diversify my skill set to maximize my defensive production. So there is this kind of weird tipping point, and it's hard to determine. And I think that's why this is so fun to talk about, is it's hard to know exactly what the best ratio is. Everyone says, I can hear Rooster right now, you got to run the ball more. You've been an advocate for that. Got to run the ball more. But I'm also, and I kind of feel like you should run the ball more. But I'm also kind of looking at the numbers and saying, if it's not efficient, don't do it. It's not helping you. It's not helping you in the way that I think a lot of people think. Now, you bring up a great point about this, and I'd like you to touch on that right now with regards to, kind of subverting defensive expectation running the football.
Right. So there's, I would say, two things. First, on a more simplistic level than the schematic subverting of expectations or whatever, is I think one of the ways you become more efficient is doing it, which I know sounds a little crazy, but like this is the thing about analytics in general. And this is like the biggest misnomer, I think the biggest misuse of analytics by most people. Analytics are a measure of what has happened, not what will happen. Some of them are very good predictors of what will happen, but all we can do with data is take what has already happened and quantify it. So by the nature of how the Commanders have approached running the football the last 3 weeks, they are 30th in EPA. Or EPA per rush attempt. Had they run the ball more, perhaps Brian Robinson busts a 40-yard run and that number looks very different. And so we don't know the counterfactuals here of like what would happen if they did it more and got more reps at it. If they were smart in certain situations and took advantage of good running looks and like hunted. I think back to the Philadelphia game when the Eagles ran on a 3rd and 6 against the Commanders and got it because they had a wide open box. And they were like, oh, well, shoot, if you're going to give us a first down, we'll take it. I think that was the Eagles who did that. So
the Bears have done it. The Seahawks.
Oh, no, that's who it was. It was the Bears. The Bears is the one I'm thinking about, where it's like, it's 3rd and 6. You never run here. Well, you subvert expectations. And it's subverting expectations, and it's also taking advantage of the X's and O's in front of you of saying there's nobody in the box. If we can hit 2 blocks, we have an easy first down here. Let's take it. That's going to greatly help your EPA per rush. And so that to me is kind of the magic here is how does the scheme, how does what teams are doing on first down, what teams are doing on second down, based off the down and distance, defensively affect what you do offensively. And we've talked about this quite a bit in terms of also personnel plays into this, right? Can you get in big personnel and throw the football because you have a schematic advantage? Can you get in light personnel, spread it out, and run the football because of the same reasons? And so these things, and Seth and I talked about this, and it's an area that he wants to study a lot more, but also an area where, if you have high-level databases, you can actually manipulate this stuff and study it and say like, okay, how efficient are we running out of 4 receiver personnel? If you got 4 receivers and 1 back on the field, you can, as a team, they have access to this level of data, and something that like a Eugene Shen would study is the new director of football or senior vice president of football strategy for the Commanders, who's an analytics guy. Like, how efficient are we there? And those it's not because you're in 4 wide receivers that you're like, oh, I know how to run the football. Let's get all of our blockers off the field outside of our O-line. It's because of how the defense responds. And so if you can manipulate that, which is something teams have been doing forever, just they haven't been quantifying it. It's like, how do we create a schematic advantage? That's been the whole history of the sport. Sure. And then how do those numbers shift? So my hypothesis is, to take it back much more micro to the Commanders, that if they ran the ball a little bit more, they would be better at it. And they could also be better passing it and generate some more big plays because the defense would react in a certain way.
Yeah, and I think to me, that's the $1 million question, and the thing that I kind of get caught up on. Like, obviously, if you run the ball more, you're going to be a little bit more efficient at it for some of the reasons you said. You get more practice at it, more reps in game, you get a better rhythm with it, you potentially could break a big run. Yeah.
And hopefully you're doing it smartly where you're doing it into good looks and good situations.
100%. But I think the thing that I would like just push back on a little bit, and just and this is just food for thought, is does that make the offense more efficient? I know a more efficient run game makes the run game more efficient, but does it make the offense more efficient? And I look at teams like right now, I think that the Tennessee Titans are a really good example. Like, they are committed to running the football, and they've been committed. And Derrick Henry is one of the best running backs in the NFL. But they run the ball a ton. They are usually leading the league in carries or close, probably top 5. But their offensive efficiency is down because their rushing efficiency is down, and they can't throw the ball on 2nd and 10 the way they want to throw the football. And now that's a team construction idea. That's a philosophical approach, all those different things. But what I would say is, in that situation, at this point of the year, what is this, week 11, right? Mm-hmm. Are you wasting reps trying to establish something that is making your offense worse in the short term? Like, if you were to do this week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of be committed to it, be okay with being in kind of some, nosebleed type of games, black eye type of games, close, messy, like kind of poor offensive efficiency games to build to this, I think that's okay. I think when you look at Detroit, right, that's a team that runs the ball very efficiently. They pass the ball very efficiently, but that's been part of their identity since day one. And I think that this is where I kind of get a little bit conflicted is, obviously, I want to run the ball more. You want to run the ball more. There's something there that we think is valuable. But also, I'm like, if we're not efficient at it, we're 30th in the NFL in first and second down in the first half of games over the last 3 weeks. Like, that hurts the offense.
Not good.
That hurts the offense. So, and it's like, what you're saying, I totally agree with.
Right, yes, and that assumes that you are staying with the same efficiency with more attempts.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you are rushing to find efficiency, is the inefficiency to find the efficiency worth the squeeze of a productive offense?
Right, and that's the question that we can't answer.
No one can
but
answer, right?
My hypothesis is yes. My hypothesis is that if you raise the percent, let's say 1 to 3%, 3 to 5%, right? We're not talking about a dramatic shift to a 60-40 or a 50-50. Like, hell no. Like, you pass the ball to score in this league. And to be very clear, like, I very much believe that. I'm talking about a micro shift to, let's say, 2% more runs that has, yes, well, you still have some no-hitters in there. Well, you probably have a holding penalty in there on occasion. Sure, absolutely. But I think overall, you become more efficient running and passing. And that small shift in percentage, one to the other, would elevate. But that's a hypothesis. I can't know that.
Again, like, one of the games this year that I thought is a good kind of sample for this, I think is the Philadelphia Eagles game, the first time we played. Mm-hmm. I think we had 22 carries or something like that. It was the most carries we've had in the year. And obviously the offensive production was very good. But one of the things we talked about in that game is specifically in the third quarter, the second the rushing efficiency went bad, right, became less efficient, the offense basically became totally inert. We had like 3 consecutive 3-and-outs. So there are samples within the season where we've rushed the football more times, but has the offense become more efficient in those situations is my question, right? And I think in that game, it's probably like what you're describing, about a 5 to 7% increase in rush attempts. But does the offensive efficiency match that? Is it supported by that? And obviously that's one game. You can't make any kind of drastic conclusions on one game. But I would say that no, it didn't do that in that specific example. And again, like
but I would counter with this weekend when the offense was at its worst in that second quarter. They went 3 and out 3 straight times, and they threw it 8 times and ran it once.
And that, to me, that's just general offensive efficiency. Like, I'm not sure that if they were to run the football more, that offense becomes more efficient. Like, I think that's the thing we're conflating here is like, I want good, efficient offense.
Sure.
And you're saying you believe that you get there by running the football more. I'm not sure you do. And now, obviously, in that specific example with Seattle, when they ran the ball efficiently in the start of the fourth quarter, they had the 15, 14, 5-yard run, like on consecutive plays. That's great. That's efficient offensive production. It leads to it elevates everything. It elevates the EPA for the whole offense. Mm-hmm. But is it worth the squeeze in the first half of like taking a whole bunch of neutral stuff and then not getting the result you want? It would be my thought there.
Well,
just to be clear for listeners, like Craig and I agree on, like, we agree. It's just I'm more tied to this efficiency of the run game, which we're not very efficient at the moment. So I feel like, yes, you should run the ball more, but you need to be more creative and more innovative with the scheme, which was you're talking about, right? Like, because I look at teams that are good at running the ball, and you can tell schematically they've invested a lot of time here. And here, and again, this is an efficient offense by the EPA metric. It's an efficient offense, but you can tell they haven't put that same level of thought and care into the run game that like a Detroit does, or San Francisco, or whoever you want to talk about. Baltimore is another one. So,
right. No. So just to kind of wrap this up, my big theory, my big hypothesis here, to use the scientific word, is that there is a tipping point where there is a maximized, optimized run-pass ratio that actually gets the most out of your offense in total, and that the Commanders are below that number right now. Considering they are running the ball more than any team in the 21st century, passing the ball more than any team in the 21st century, I feel like that's not a crazy hypothesis, because, and to be clear, Ben Standing wrote about this in The Athletic this week. They are literally passing the ball at 68.7%, I think is the number. There's only 2 other teams that are above 68%, and it's the 2013 Falcons who won 4 games and the 2006 Lions who won 3. So these were teams that were down all the time and just threw like crazy because they were trying to get back in games, as opposed to the Commanders that have been competitive and in like good game flow situations for a lot of their season, even if they've been on the wrong end of it at the end. I'd also say that, thank God they've stemmed the sack issue, but like earlier in the season, part of this calculation is you want to see your EPA per play number plummet, lose your starting quarterback. Like, you want to see a bad EPA per play? Look at Tommy DeVito leading the New York Giants. So, like, there's an almost endless number of factors here in terms of injury risk, in terms of scheme and how defenses react, in terms of your own personnel. Like, if you've got Saquon Barkley, your rushing stats are going to look one way, or the Eagles' offensive line, your stats are going to look one way, and your efficiency is going to look different than if you've got whoever else. So there's endless numbers. There's an endless number of numbers here. But I think that the big takeaway here is that simply just passing the ball more because it's more efficient running is oversimplifying what the analytics actually tell you. And that there is, even if it's impossible to find with data, and certainly with the data that's accessible to us, there is a certain, there's a certain schematic advantage to not being one-dimensional that is worth running the football some amount. And what that number is an endless search for teams to find. I think that the Commanders are below that number. I think you also think the Commanders are below that number. But in order to make that, or in order to truly optimize, obviously they would have to change how they practice. They'd have to run, change how they design their run game to actually make it worth running the ball even more than it would be just for some extra carries.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fall on it. And again, it's hard to know, because we're talking about the other thing that is kind of tied to this is you talk about, field position, sustaining drives, in certain situations, if you can back a team up offensively, getting a 6-play drive to a punt, there's value there. However, that value comes on converting first downs. So what is the thing that helps me as an offensive coordinator convert first downs? And right now for Eric Bieniemy, based on the numbers, and again, like you said, numbers are they are a collection of data. They're not predictive of anything. when you look at that stuff, it's passing the football, and that's how they've built this thing. That's how they've constructed it. So we talk about the scheme, we talk about perspective, offensive perspective, and to me, it's no surprise that this is where we're at. Like this is what we're doing, and I think they're not great running the ball. They don't commit a lot of resources to it. So do the thing that you've committed all this time and energy to, and that's what you're seeing on a week-to-week basis here. And ultimately, like, it's been relatively efficient for them. And so, like, kind of, I know that's not the funnest thing to hear, but until you kind of shift your offensive perspective, like, this is gonna be who this team is, and this is, like, maybe this is the most efficient way for them to run the ball. I know that seems crazy, and I don't totally agree with that, but I'm saying there is
it's possible.
Yeah, there's
I will say this, for full season, first through fourth down, every quarter or whatever, like every play this season, their success rate running the football is 14th. Like, they're top half of the league in success rate.
They've had some big runs.
Yeah, and that helps. But, like, that's the thing is, you can't get big runs if you don't run it. And I do think it's wild. I know that they're, like, in plays of 20 plus yards, they're like 8th this year. So, like, they are generating explosive plays within reason, but there seems to be a real hard cap on those explosive plays. They haven't had a 40 plus yard play to a wide receiver all year, which considering they have like 4 or 5 guys that run 4.3 and a quarterback with an absolute howitzer of an arm, seems crazy that they haven't been able to take the top off a defense like that.
I mean, that's one of the things about Kyle's offense. Like, they run the ball a ton. You get safeties in the box, and there is a little bit of boom and bust to this, but you get better matchups outside. You get better coverage structures. You kind of get them out of this, like, kind of this amorphous cover 3 match, cover 4 match stuff that's really hard to identify and push the football down the field. So there is something to that, but I also think that—
That's my point. That's the thing.
I know that is your point, but like, that's not like that.
It's not that simple, but like, that is the hypothesis.
That's one way to skin a cat, right? That's one way. EB's doing another version of that, and it doesn't lead to these explosive plays, but you get more plus 20-yard plays. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there is a give and take with everything you're doing offensively. So I think that's the thing that I get to also. And also, I think it's important to recognize that game flow has not been overly kind to them in terms of, like, this defense doesn't make a lot of stops. You got to score a lot of points. You got to throw the ball a little bit more. Like, that's also part of this is it's not just offense, it's team. Like, there's a team element here. Like, I look at I keep going back to San Fran and Baltimore.
San Fran, by the way, who leads the league in EPA per play total for the season.
They find explosives, but also they are insulated in terms of game flow because their defense is awesome. Baltimore, their defense is awesome, right? Like, they can kind of manage stuff. It's okay if they punt. It doesn't matter. They don't have to score. There's not this pressure on them offensively to, like, blow the doors off every single week because they can win a game 20-17, and that's happened to them a couple times this year. So I think that it's complicated. It's nuanced. I'm not sure what the right number is. They might be at it right now. It seems like they should run more, but I do feel like when I watch the games, there's a pressure on them offensively to score a lot of points because they kind of understand defensively what's happening here. And again, like, this is why we could talk about this till the end of time, because there's not a definitive thing, right? But I think we both agree that they probably should run the ball more. I want them to be more efficient running the ball if they're going to commit resources to it.
Correct.
It feels like it's too late to do that. And we can't know it because you need to, like, actually see them execute that. So
right. And I will say something else that we're not going to talk about now, in part because it's, like, impossible. There is theoretically a way to quantify the offense-defense tie. It's something I've thought about for a long time.
Yeah.
But I asked Seth about it. He's like, there's not really anything that's definitive right now. You'd have to, like, manipulate a bunch of data.
Sure.
But there does seem to be something there about teams, because, like, if you run the ball, the defense gets to rest more. Well, not if you run it 3 times and are out. Like, even though the game clock runs, like, real time, you don't get any extra bonus. It's not a video game where you got to collect a star and all of a sudden you're healthy again because the offense ran the football. The real time elapse is the real time elapse. It does shorten the game, though, so you probably get less plays overall. So that's like a whole other bucket. We'll have Seth Walder from ESPN on later in the offseason to talk about all this for sure. And if you want the initial conversation between me and Seth, check out the Hoffman Show podcast feed or check out the interview on my YouTube page @Craig Hoffman. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. So we just talked about all this fancy data and information, Logan. How does it actually apply to the Commanders and their offense against a Giants defense where if you want to look at a bad EPA per play, if you want to look at some bad data of all kinds, go back and look at the first craptastic game that these two teams played where the Commanders scored just 7 points. How do they attack this team differently this time? Obviously, we know they've got some changes on the offensive line. The Giants also don't have Leonard Williams. You saw him last week with Seattle, so that's helpful. Yeah. But I mean, Dallas just absolutely destroyed this Giants defense. What can the Commanders take of don'ts from their first matchup and do's from some of these other teams that have been able to put up a ton of points on New York and have a much better offensive performance on Sunday?
Yeah, I think this will be really interesting because when you look at that Dallas game, I think there's this oh my gosh, they blew the doors off Dallas or Dallas blew the doors off the Giants. But through the first quarter and quarter and a half, almost to the second quarter to halftime, it was like 7-0 for a long time. And so the Giants defense gets a 4 and out. They get a turnover. It should have been 7-7, but Tommy DeVito is like not good at quarterback. So they got a turnover return to the 15-yard line of Dallas going into score, and they couldn't get any points out of it. So I think there's this perception that obviously New York is struggling. I think that's 100% right. But when you look at the start of these games, the defense has kept them in it. And when you look at our game, the defense for sure kept them in it, right? Turnovers, lots of sacks, lots of pressures. And so that's still the defense there. And I think you bring up a great point. They're not quite as dynamic in the front without Leonard Williams there. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence had 15 pressures against the New York Jets, so he's still there. You see him just making centers' lives miserable. So he's a guy you definitely got to account for. And then you got to account for Wink Martindale's scheme. And he does a good job. He puts his guys in high leverage spots all the time, but they are number one in the NFL in free runners to the quarterback. And Sam in the first game had a really hard time with that. You know, he turned a lot of those into sacks. I think we got a new Sam Howell now, but I think this is a really good measuring stick. Like this is kind of was his kryptonite, a team that's going to pressure a lot, kind of give you confusing looks, and that's tough for a young player. So what I would say is let's make sure the protection's locked in. Let's make sure that's why Tyler Larson's playing center. Can he get this stuff ID'd? Can we get the known rushers blocked? All those types of things. That's going to be huge. Sam, know your protection rules. Know when you're hot. Know where the ball needs to go. He did a great job of that against Seattle. Seattle brought a little bit of like 4 and 5 man pressure, simulated pressures with 4, and I thought he did a great job. So this is going to be like the varsity level of that in terms of extreme pressure looks. But I think he's progressed and grown in a nice way that he'll be able to handle it. So when you look at teams that have done a good job against them, like I look at what Las Vegas did, I look at what Dallas did, and Dallas was like, we're going to spread you out. We're going to identify one-on-ones, and we're going to win with quick slants because our guys can beat press coverage, and we're going to eat. Also, I think it's important to note that game flow for this defense seems to be playing a factor. They know they're getting nothing from the offense, and so they'll be competitive for a quarter. But if you can start scoring some points, there is this kind of like, oh my gosh, here we go again. There's no way we can win this game because we as a defense can't score 14 points, right? So there's a little bit of that going on when you watch them. So I think they're still a good competitive group, if that makes sense. I don't want to give them too much credit, but
I would say this, like, it's pretty easy for almost any team in the NFL to compete for a quarter, right? Even like teams in blowouts, like you look at the third quarter sometimes and it's 0-0 or it's 3-3 and it's like, but the final score was 48-7. So, it's about at the NFL level being able to compete for 4 quarters, and the Giants just should not be able to compete with the Commanders for 4 quarters based 100%. Off the current state of the Giants. So the Commanders better uphold their part of the bargain. And so, I guess early on in the game, it probably emotionally is easier to do that, but you got to keep going. You got to put the pedal to the metal. And the Commanders have at times done a good job of scoring early this year. So I think that's something that could be hugely beneficial if they could get an opening drive or 2 touchdowns and get up like they did on Atlanta, like they did, frankly, to start Seattle. Can you make those plays early? Because unlike those other teams that made it interesting late, the Giants are very unlikely to make it interesting.
And so I guess what I'm basically saying there is like, don't let them stick around. Like, don't let them do it, right? Don't give their defense hope. Like, because offensively, they don't have a lot going on. Don't give their defense hope, because, like, if you look at the last game, we scored 7 points, right? The Commanders. And so that game flow is exactly what they want. They want to play field, like, if they're going to beat us. And I was thinking about this, like, what has to happen for the New York Giants to beat the Washington Commanders, just based on the talent of the roster? One is they win the field position game, right? So they get you backed up. You're punting. They're in plus field position, and they just keep you backed up. You never get anything going offensively. That's what happened in the first game, and they end up winning, right? So turnovers is another thing that allows them to stay in it, right? And this defense, they're not great. I think they're like 17th in the league in terms of takeaways or turnovers, but they do find explosive defensive plays. They get a lot of sacks. They get fumbles. They get interceptions. So don't let that happen. And if you can do that, I think the Commanders' offense is talented enough to put up 28, and if they do that, then the defense is going to quit. But if you give them hope, and it's like, we're in this negative field position situation, we can't get past our own 25, we're punting a bunch, they're going to get hope and they're going to get juiced. Because if you watch the Jets game, that's essentially the game flow of the Jets game. Now, Zach Wilson is a much different player than Sam Howell, but it was 10 to 10, and they were up late. It was like it was 7 to 10 going into the overtime period. They obviously, the Jets come back and kick a field goal or whatever
to tie and send it overtime. Yeah, but it was like right before that final drive. Yeah,
it was gross, and like the defense was playing with their hair on fire. And the defense is the only thing in this game, in my opinion, after watching a lot of film of them, that keeps them in it. So offensively, what are our protection rules? Let's be consistent offensively. Let's be efficient offensively, and let's score points. Like, that's really what it comes down to. Just quite literally, do your job. You should be able to. This is a little bit of a, they present an interesting dilemma from a pressure standpoint, and we saw what that can do in the first matchup. But you've seen it once. You've gotten better at handling this stuff. Let's make sure that we execute the way we know we can execute and win this football game. And you can win it with the offensive side of the football. Because if you're efficient, don't turn the football over, score a couple points, score 21 points, the game's over.
Right. I think this is a huge game for the receivers to bounce back. You watch what like CeeDee Lamb did, and specifically, like, I'm not calling out Terry McLaurin because we don't do that. That's a silly thing that radio people do, or calling out, like, that matters. Yeah. But like, I will call attention to Terry McLaurin. You watch what CeeDee Lamb does in the Dallas game, and he just absolutely wrecks the souls of the Giants defense. And of course, like, Dak's on a heater right now. Yeah. They've got some other guys that make that a little bit easier because they've got good threats, but like, Terry's got help as well. And Sam Howell's playing his best ball of his career so far, the last 3 weeks. And I think Terry's got it. And by the way, Terry's probably a little ticked at how the Banks matchup went last time because the kid is pretty mouthy, the rookie out of Maryland. So, like, go out and wreck him. Like, go out and absolutely show that you are one of the best receivers in the NFL. And I think that it's on EB to give him those opportunities. Obviously, it's on Sam to give him those opportunities, on the O-line to protect, to get those opportunities. But we were talking earlier about some of the quick game stuff and, making sure that the right guys get involved as soon as possible. Like, I think, and Sam talked about that this week at the podium. He's like, we have to get our guys involved early. I would make sure that you have some of that quick game stuff called for Terry early. I would try to get like Jahan or Curtis, like a carry early. Curtis, obviously the carry options are unlimited because you can put him at running back if you want to. You can have him go an end around. But like, you see the reverse that Dallas throws to CeeDee Lamb and he scores on it. There's not just benefit in terms of those guys feeling involved and getting involved and finding the rhythm of the game. But I think when we talk about slowing down a pass rush like the Giants, obviously the number one thing you can do is get it blocked up, right? The number one thing that you can do is make sure that you're actually solid in your protection rules and execute. There's no strategy that is, execution proof, as we've become fond of saying on this show. But can you use every blade of grass side to side, make them cover a lot more space, keep that pass rush off balance, and punish some of their, and this was the thing that I think was really frustrating last time, they never were able to punish the Giants' aggression. Right. Okay, you want to be this super aggressive team. How do we weaponize that against you? And from the screen game to misdirection type of stuff to whatever, I do think EB, obviously, as a play caller, he's got a role in every game, but has a big role to play in helping this offense do that in a way that they did not when they scored just 7 last time.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think when you look at the model that's been laid out by Las Vegas, laid out by Dallas, it's spread them out, spread them out. Like one of the things about this defensive philosophy is obviously the pressure's tough, but it's the coverage. It really leverages coverage players to a high level, and they've got a couple guys. I don't have the injury report right in front of me, that are a little bit banged up right now. A couple guys with the shoulder, secondary guys, concussions, all those types
Literally,
of things.
their entire starting secondary is questionable.
Right. So if that's the case, man, another thing you'll see is like when you're watching the Jets game, when you're watching Dallas, for example, like the coverage disguises are awesome. The blitz patterns are awesome. But one of the things that they did that Dallas got from spreading them out a little bit was you got a little bit of time, because in those disguises, if the receiver is really wide, right, the slot receiver is really wide, the nickel's blitzing, for example, right, he's got to match the receiver to kind of disguise the blitz. And so he had to run a long way. Dak got back there, hit his step. They didn't even block the nickel, but he gets the ball out in rhythm and timing and ends up being an explosive play. So can you do that? I think that'll be a big feature. Obviously, those MAC protection stuff that they struggled with in the first game, I think you'll see those again. Because if you get those targeted correctly and efficiently, there's big plays to be had. And I think that was one of the frustrating things coming out of that film review on that Tuesday pod, was like there was opportunities and they just couldn't maximize it. So again, I think the plan will be good. I think they'll be ready to go. I think this offense will be hungry because they were kind of embarrassed last time, and I think when you look at the plan that was laid out in the first game, you say, man, if they execute this game is 28-0 in the first half, but they didn't, right? The Giants had executed them. So can you just kind of build yourself back up, say, hey man, this is what's going to happen. We saw what happened last time. Let's make sure we hit this stuff. And I really think that's all it comes down to. I think EB in the first matchup in the first game had a good philosophy, good perspective. Let's execute that, right? Let's get that called correctly, Tyler, Sam. Let's make sure we know where to go with the football. Because quite frankly, if you do that, if you get it protected, I don't think they can match up with our receivers. And they've shown that over the last couple of weeks. If you can get it protected, those DBs are going to struggle for them, outside of Banks, who's been pretty good this year. But even he's graded in like the 50 percentile range for PFF, right? Because he's leveraged to the hilt every single game.
It's a little bit like what's happening to BSJ, where it's like he's a fine player, but he ain't ready to, he's not on CeeDee Lamb or Devontae Adams level. So if he's got to guard number ones, and this is why I go back to Terry too, all right, Terry, you want to be a number one guy. Right. Let's do it. If I was EB, I would probably, again, I'm not going to do it as a radio host because it's a wacky bit, but if I'm EB, I'm probably challenging him a little bit. Be like, hey man, you want it? Let's roll. We're going to give you some chances this week. So let's go get it. You're mad that we missed you on that deep post last week. Well, here's your chance. It's going to come back around. Right. So I think that'll be interesting to watch, but obviously the most important thing, protection, get that thing lined up. And then also, obviously this was the game where Nick Gates got himself benched. Ken Tyler Larson bowl up against Dexter Lawrence.
That's
the much bigger body.
We were talking about this in the first matchup, but he's literally grading at defensive MVP level right now. That's how good he's been.
He's awesome.
He has the ability to just totally ruin a game. So probably need a plan for him when they're just rushing 4. And Tyler Larson, put your big boy pants on, because that's going to be a tough day at the office. But
yeah, get ready. But and then by the way, have fun resting up, because you play again 4 days later on Thanksgiving. That sucks. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. We're live at Tap Sports Bar on Sunday, pregame show. Make sure you get it in with us 3 hours prior to the game. It starts on 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980, live on YouTube as well. Doors open at Tap if you want to come hang out with us in person starting at 11. Okay, can the defense bounce back? Obviously, a rough game against Seattle in terms of a final output. They couldn't bow up in the end. They gave up a ton of yardage. This Giants offense is as prime for a get-right game as any unit you're going to see in the league. It is not very good. Saquon's banged up. Waller is out. Tommy DeVito's starting at quarterback.
Hyatt's got a concussion, right?
Yeah, Hyatt's got a concussion. Wan'Dale Robinson is listed as questionable. Literally the entire team is banged up. And it feels like every time we've said this year, it's like, oh, the Bears, they're not very good and they're banged up, or this, the Giants, the first time around, there's been all these games where it feels like they got to win this one. Like the opponent's barely there and it hasn't gone great.
Yeah.
This has got to be the one for the defense.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, when you look at the last matchup, the defense matched up pretty well against him. And I think this iteration of the Giants is worse, right? Like they don't have Tyrod Taylor. They have Tommy DeVito, excuse me. And he's interesting because he's, kind of like Taylor Heineke or Jake Fromm type of guy, right? They got a little athleticism, a little bit of arm talent, but there's a reason he's a third string quarterback. Doesn't see stuff overly well. He's a rookie. He's like a second year guy. Like there's a lot of reasons to be excited about going up against him. He sits really deep in the pocket behind an offensive line that's not very good. Evan Neal, to his credit, has been playing a little bit better the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but got rolled up on last week, so he's questionable.
And then Andrews, the left tackle, is back and he's playing good football.
Oh, that's what I mean. Andrew Thomas got rolled up on last week and is questionable.
Yeah, so he's awesome, but and Evan Neal is playing a little bit better, but still, like they're not playing well enough, and they're all banged up. They're all nicked up, and this is the thing: when you're on a bad football team, those injuries start showing up. That ankle, which you were playing through before, is like, man, why am I playing through this ankle? Like this isn't worth it for me. And I think you're going to see a little bit of that because this team is struggling big time. I will say, when you watch like the Jets game, when you watch the Las Vegas game, they do have opportunities for big plays that the defense is able to shut down. So, for example, against the Jets, like Saquon's running a choice route and he kills the linebacker. He's wide open. Ball gets bad at the line of scrimmage. Like, if they complete that, that's 7. That's 6 points, right? Like, so there are these moments, and they're very few and far between. But there's probably 5 moments in the game in Las Vegas, right? They run a play action pass. The post is wide open over the top. Tommy DeVito kind of shorts it's intercepted, but it's there. You know what I'm saying? So like there are these moments. It's just about when those moments come, are you awake and are you ready for them? And can you make a play? Because if they hit a couple of those, the complexion of the game can shift pretty dramatically. They're not a good offense. They're struggling really bad. They rely on Saquon a ton. All those, that's all true, right? But just for fans to be aware of, there are 5 to 7 moments in the game where it's like, if they hit this play, it looks completely different. Sure. And they haven't done it because they're not very good, but I'm just saying there are opportunities. And so what does our defense do versus those opportunities? And do they make the play when that moment shows up? Can they make the play? I think they can. They've shown an ability against lesser offenses and lesser quarterback play to play really well. I think they're going to be fine. I think we're going to see a good kind of version of this offensive line. I think so. But again, one of the other elements of this is like offensively, you got to score points. If you let them kind of turtle up and run the ball, throw quick game, be very selective about their shots, the result could be very similar to what you saw in the first matchup, right? You got to score some points, force them out of that shell, get them to stretch themselves out, throw the football with DeVito, and I think you'll win the game. But again, there is a version, a weird, bizarro universe where they hit a couple and you're like, oh no, like we're in a game now versus an NFL football team.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this defense has consistently performed to the level of the opposing quarterback this year.
100%.
Now that's not like to the, like obviously it's been bad overall, very, very bad. As discussed, the statistics are terrible. They're one of the worst 5 defenses in the league by basically every metric. But the fluctuation has been consistent, right? Week 1, you get Josh Dobbs, who had just gotten there, and they play okay. Against Russell Wilson, it was not as good. Luckily the offense was able to put up 35 or whatever they put up, and you win the game. Josh Allen absolutely murdered them, and then up and down you go. Jalen Hurts has been very good against them. Geno is not as good as Jalen Hurts, so instead of scoring 31 or 34, they scored 29. Right. But Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor, they only put up 14. So like Tommy DeVito should be worth like 7 points. And that's up to the defense to make that a reality. And I think this is a big week for the interior D-line guys. Like, can you finally get going? I think it's also going to be interesting to see what they do at the other end spot. I'm not expecting James Smith-Williams to play. He's got the hamstring injury. And so F.A. Obata probably gets the start. And F.A.'s got to play with discipline better than he did last Sunday. Because if you get out of your gap against Saquon Barkley, like that's how you give up an explosive play. So, if you're KJ Henry and Andre Jones Jr., same thing. Like you have to get in there and play with discipline. But it's going to be interesting for sure. Not having Waller's a big deal. He killed them last time. You don't have that weapon. So I'm very curious to see how things go. I think this could be a nice day for Emmanuel Forbes to get back in there. Obviously, there's no like big physical receiver to deal with. You see a lot more Quan Martin out there. Not that you're like, hey, this is a practice squad game, but I do think this is like such a great opportunity to build some confidence, play with cohesion. But like you said, it's still like Brian Dable's a very good NFL coach. And so schematically, there is going to be 3 or 4 moments in the game where if you're not on your P's and Q's, you're going to give up an explosive. And I think the last thing I'll say real quick, because this is not the most intense breakdown, like the Giants are not very good. But can you, even when you give up the big ones, make sure that you don't miss that final tackle, right? Make them earn it. If you can tackle someone shoestring at the 5-yard line, that is worth it because the Giants are going to have trouble scoring. Every extra play they have to run is their chances drop. So make sure that even if you give up a 20-yarder, it doesn't become the 60-yarder. So the back end, Percy Butler obviously has had this happen a couple weeks in a row. Make that tackle because the more they have to earn it, obviously that's always something. You never want to just give away points.
Especially this week.
But with the Giants, if they get one big play, the chances that they're going to get a second one in a row are not very good. That's, I guess, kind of the point.
And when you watch, Saquon, I watched all of his explosive runs over the last couple of weeks. Like there's a couple opportunities where the hole's there, he's breaking through, and then the safety just comes up and is a speed bump, trips him up enough, and it's a 14-yard gain instead of a 60-yard gain.
Right.
So I think there's definitely a lot of merit to that because like he's their most explosive player in their offense. And right now, with everybody hurt, so they're going to try and get him touches. They're going to try and get him opportunities, and he'll get his. He'll get 20 carries. He'll get 10. He'll get probably 5 opportunities to catch a football. But can you just be like, hey, you're not going for 60 on any of these, right? Which is what happened in the first game for the explosive. And I think, I totally agree with that. There's not a lot of firepower here. So you just got to play consistent defense, make them go on long drives or make them go 3 and out. Like that's really that they're not good enough. Tommy DeVito, he's a backup quarterback. He's a 3rd string quarterback for a reason. When these guys play, you should be able to dominate. Now I've already we've both alluded to the idea that if you screw up on one of those 5 shot plays in the game, like you're going to be hurting and it could be a ball game, but don't let that happen. Don't let that happen.
And like you said, if the offense has already put up 28 and it goes from 28-0 to 28-7, that feels a lot worse or feels a lot better. So offense got to do their thing on that side of the ball. All right, we'll preview this game obviously a lot more, and we'll see who's in and who's out. I think that's going to be a big deal as well with all these Giants injuries, especially on Sunday. Next week is going to be a little funky, obviously, with the holiday, but we will get you a film review, and then everything else is up in the air in terms of game preview. We'll try to get something for you as you drive around on Thanksgiving and get ready for Commanders and Cowboys, but stay tuned for the schedule on that. We'll have that by Sunday night. So the instant reaction show, we will see you on YouTube for that. See you for the pregame show before then. And of course, I got the rest of the week on the Hoffman show. So I'll see you on the radio from 4 to 7. For Logan, I'm Craig. Thanks for watching and listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.